KACU-TV proudly presents On Campus with your host, ACU Vice President and Dean of Campus Life, Dr. Gary McCaleb. Here's Gary.
On campus today, we're in the studios of KACU-FM visiting with Dr. Larry Bradshaw, Director of Broadcasting of KACU-FM, as well as Professor of Mass Communications with the Communications Department at ACU. Thank you for taking the time to visit with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I enjoy your program and glad to come and talk to you.
We're visiting at about the point of a 6-month anniversary of KACU-FM and National Public Radio, right?
That's right, Gary. We signed on the air June 2nd, and after about a 2-year process of planning the station and so forth. So we're coming up on our half-year anniversary right now.
Could you tell us a little bit about the background of what National Public Radio is and how it fits and why the decision was made to make that kind of adaptation of programming?
National Public Radio, I guess, would be similar to what the people would be familiar with here in the Abilene area, public broadcasting service on television. It originates out of Washington, D.C. NPR is kind of a loose connection of about 300 stations all across the United States. Some of the big stations are like WGBH in Boston and KERA in Dallas, radio. And the main feature of NPR, of course, is its classical music programming and also its outstanding news. And we felt like the two combinations, in-depth news, we run about 5 hours of news a day, and the outstanding classical music were two things that Abilene really didn't have and needed, and I think our estimates have been correct.
Now, when you talk about programming that is provided by NPR, is there any kind of agreement that you have to sign on with as far as how much of the feed you take as compared to how much you do on your own?
No. We're completely independent in that sense. We pay a fee to NPR for their programming. It amounts to about $25,000 a year. And for that, we can carry as much of their programming as we want or as little as we want. Most all NPR stations carry the morning edition and All Things Considered, the flagship newscasts. And then it kind of depends. Some of them will carry a lot of their classical music programming and some will carry less, depending on the format. But we're not locked in any way. There are a few special programs that come down that we have to buy extra, but 90% of what they offer is covered by that one yearly fee.
Maybe we can come back and have a chance to talk a little bit more about specific programming later, but
Good.
We are here in, as I said a minute ago, in the studios of KACU-FM,
That's right.
and this is one of the areas. Could you
Right.
tell us a little bit about what happens in this room?
This is the production studio. It may be kind of hard to see for the viewer, but most all of our programs which we tape and air at a later date are produced in this room. The program Abilene Fine Arts, for example. We have people from the Abilene community, from Hardin Simmons and McMurray and ACU, come and help us do that, and we concentrate on fine music programming in the community. We've just done the Abilene Philharmonic, and we'll be airing that very shortly. But that's all produced in here, either on reel-to-reel, on compact disc, occasionally on high-quality cassette, and then all of the music that we aired during the daytime is aired on cart, and these are assembled here, so that's what we do here. That's mainly the function of the production room. The control room is right next door to us, and you might be able to take a look in there.
I think we're looking in there now.
Yeah, this is where the day-to-day operations of the station take place. Our program director, Tony Bono, is there in the morning, and we run more of a pop music format in the daytime. And our news is done from this studio, so really it's the central hub for KACU-FM, and something's going on in there 18 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week.
You know, something about that you've already mentioned that gets into the way programming is done, because some of the programs are fed in here, not necessarily at the times you choose
That's right.
to broadcast them. Is that
That's
correct? And you have freedom with that flexibility?
That's right. With classical music station, most everything is done on tape because, or now compact disc, because you want it to be flawless. You don't want to make any mistakes. And the only thing that we do live, of course, other than our daytime programming, would be our news is all done live. We don't pre-tape any of that. And we do a Saturday night program called The Outer Limits, which is some of this new age classical and jazz music, and that's done live. But most of our programs are put together very carefully, and if there are any mistakes, we edit them out ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. When you say it's done on tape, are you saying that the conventional, at least what the traditional approach to the turntable and playing the records is getting out of date now in radio stations?
That's right. Most of the stations, even in Abilene and Dallas and Austin and so forth, are there are no more disc jockeys. They're cart jockeys. Everything is put onto cartridges. That way you don't wear the music out, and you have a better quality of sound, and it lasts much longer and so forth. So it's a lot more expensive. These little carts like this are about $5 a piece, and so every time you record one song, and only one song goes on this cart, it's kind of like your old 8-track. You remember the old 8-tracks? It's very similar in size, not compatible, but a similar type of device. But that's about $5 just for the cart.
And there'll just be one song.
Yeah, one song
on a cart that you want. Right. It's not like an album that you'll have a set of records. So
that's right.
Then as they play it, they just feed
that's
that
right.
particular cartridge in.
And we have a trip cue system to our music, which means that there's a little signal, inaudible signal on this tape that trips the next song. And so we usually play 4 or 6 songs in a row, and it's all done without you having to touch anything except touch the button at the beginning of the sequence of songs. But it gives your station a lot more uniform sound. And, you know, we didn't want to sound like a student station. We wanted to sound like as big a town station as we could. And I think we've accomplished that. That's what people tell us, that we sound as good as Dallas or some of these big cities. And, of course, that makes us feel real good when they say that.
Now, one of the things unique about this programming is that until KACU-FM brought NPR in here, there really wasn't a way for people in this area to hear NPR programming. Is that correct?
That's correct. We had a few people here in town that were such NPR fans that they would have their friends in Dallas tape the programs and send them in the mail to us. So they have become big supporters of the station. But we are the first to bring NPR to West Texas. Lubbock is working on building a station. El Paso has a station, but we're the first between Dallas and El Paso to bring National Public Radio out here. So it's been a real treat for the people in this area.
At the present time, what kind of coverage does NPR programming have as far as the nation is concerned?
Well, there is a push in Congress right now to get 90% of all the population covered by NPR, and they're very close to that. San Antonio just got an NPR station. They were the largest city in the country that didn't have NPR. But most cities now above 200,000 or above 100,000 have access to NPR.
What do you think it is? Perhaps there's been some marketing studies or surveys that have indicated this, but what is it about NPR that makes it, that differentiates it from other radio programming and other radio stations?
Well, one of our listeners wrote a nice little note to me, and she said, thank you for bringing intelligence to the radio. And that may sound a little elitist, but people have called NPR the New York Times of the air. And it is because the people who are behind NPR are extremely intelligent people, very well educated. The appeal is to a more highly educated and more affluent audience. The people who like classical music, the people who like drama, in-depth news, and so forth, are a little bit different kind of audience. We thought Abilene would be ideal for this because we have 3 universities, 3 colleges here in town, and the radio at that time was pretty well limited to rock and country, and one easy listening station. So we felt like this market was ripe for an NPR station.
And have you found that to be true?
Oh man, we have just been overwhelmed by the response. You know, we had a little fundraiser back in October, and we didn't have any idea how to set our goal. We didn't know what we would be able to do. I thought we would raise about $3,000 in 4 days. Our most optimistic person, Karen Stevens, our development director, thought we'd raise $4,000. But we raised.
So you were from a low of 3 to a high of 4.
That's right. But we got just about $17,000 in 4 days.
Goodness.
And we had about 400 friends who have come on and helped to support us. So it's been great. The response has been overwhelming. Our wall out there is just covered with letters of people who say, "Oh, we really appreciate the station." And so the response has been great.
When you talk about trying to take NPR programming and then fill in between with locally produced programming,
Right.
did you have to make a conscious kind of approach it in a conceptual way that says whatever we do in other programming has got to be consistent with what NPR programming is?
Yeah, very much so, Gary. We spent a lot of time coming up with what kind of station are we going to be. We knew we couldn't come in with an all-classical station. The classical audience is generally 1%, and that just wouldn't give us a broad enough base to support the station. So we said, what could we do in the daytime that would be compatible with our classical music, not offend our classical music listeners, and maybe build a broader base for the classical music? And so we said, well, let's come up with a classic adult format, meaning by classic, the classic soft hits of the last 20 years. And so our daytime music is music designed for people 25 years and older. It's designed for the same kind of people who like the classical but a little bit lighter music in the daytime, for offices and for businesses. That's a real thrill to me, by the way, to be able to go into Taco Bueno or one of the businesses in town, and there's our station being played up there. So I think we've tried to do that. Now, of course, the classical people, they wish we were classical all the time, and the jazz people, they wish we were jazz all the time, and we try to accommodate them as best we can. But there are certain limited hours, and the classical library is limited. And so
that's an interesting point that maybe we have a chance to clear up here, because I have had people ask me, is it permissible for a business or an office to play a radio station without, in other words, are they infringing on rights of that radio station by doing that in that way? Apparently you don't mind if they do that.
Not at all. Now, there is a kind of a technical thing based on the number of square feet of your business. And so an establishment like Walmart or Kmart, they are not supposed to run a radio station. That's a violation of copyright law. It's one of those things that's not enforced very much. But a small business can air us. One of the banks in town has us on their telephone standby, so when you're put on hold, you can hear us. But it is based on the size of your business. The large businesses, the major chains and so forth, are technically not supposed to carry a radio station, any radio station.
When radio began to realize that TV was infringing on what had been its sort of own property for a long time, one of the things that people said happened was that people started listening to the radio in the car. How much of your listening audience, do you have any way of knowing whether you are listening to in the car as opposed to at home or in offices, or does it matter?
I remember when you asked the KORQ news team on your program kind of what had happened to radio, and we have to kind of do some guessing in this area. There's no real way to tell. There is a little service now called AutoScan, and they have a little sensor, and they can actually drive up beside your car, Gary, and tell you what radio station you're listening to.
Is that right?
Yeah, and they do position themselves down there by the mall, and as people drive by, they rate the stations based on cars. But Arbitron and Nielsen is a telephone or diary-based service, and they can't really tell. Our feeling is that many, many people listen to us between 5 and 6 and between 7 and 8 in the morning on the way to work in their cars. And we feel like our audience tends to fall off in the evening, but we think we have an excellent audience when compared to other radio stations, because we think if people want an alternative to television, they probably wouldn't go to a pop music station. They would probably go to a classical music station. So our feeling is, you know, I sit down and I do our local inserts for All Things Considered at 5. I come on at 5:05. My feeling is that there are a lot of people getting into their car and driving home listening to us at that hour. And our fundraising efforts confirmed that. Our calls tended to come in very well between the hours of 7 in the morning and 8 and 5 and 6. And so we kind of encourage them, don't forget us after you get out of your car and get to the phone, you know, give us a ring.
We need to take a break here for just
Okay.
a minute. We're visiting today in the studios of KACU-FM with Dr. Larry Bradshaw.
I'm Bob Edwards.
I'm Barbara Hochtert. This is NPR's Morning Edition.
This is Noah Adams.
And I'm Susan Stamberg. Every day on All Things Considered, we bring you the human stories behind the headlines.
And we take you into the minds of thoughtful people.
Well, look who's coming through that door. I think we met somewhere before.
This is American Public Radio.
We're back on campus and in the studios of KACU-FM visiting with Dr. Larry Bradshaw, Director of Broadcasting. We've been talking about that we're in the production room?
That's correct.
And one of the things that goes on here, perhaps you could explain and demonstrate.
Gary, we're monitoring right now the NPR satellite.
Music spanning 6 centuries, including sacred and secular works from the 11th century Italian church, the court of Henry VIII, and the cathedrals of 17th century Mexico.
NPR has an exciting Christmas season offering of classical music coming up, and I think that's what they're talking about right now. Many of these programs that we air in the evening actually come down in the daytime, and so we tape them and then delay them until later on in the evening. We have 4 different channels that come off of the West Star satellite. And for stereo, of course, it takes 2 separate channels, but we can actually record 2 separate programs from NPR at the same time. And sometimes that will happen. For example, Prairie Home Companion that comes down on Saturday night comes at 5 live, and we air that live. But we can also record a separate program of classical music that comes at 5 and maybe play that, say, Sunday night. So that's what that satellite gives you, a lot of flexibility and allows you to.
Do you have occasions when you actually broadcast live directly off of that feed and over the air?
Yes, and that's where the quality is just crystal perfect clear, no reproduction involved at all. Prairie Home Companion is an example of that. We are contractually supposed to air them live every night. Now, we've had to delay them a couple times because of the football games, but you have to air them by 6 o'clock each evening, and that way their national advertising all makes this sense. It's all aired at the same time throughout the country.
But you haven't you, begun to rebroadcast that a second time? Or you?
Yes, the response to Prairie Home Companion has been so terrific that we have made arrangements to air that on Sunday afternoon, so people who are busy Saturday evening get a chance to hear Garrison Keillor. And I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to him the last 2 or 3 weeks, but I think his shows are the best I've ever heard. I mean, they're outstanding. Just really good.
Garrison Keillor is a kind of a folk hero in his own right, isn't he? I mean, he's developed, it seems like, a higher awareness of NPR because of his program. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, except it's APR.
Oh, APR.
Yeah, there are really 2 networks that we're affiliated with, National Public Radio out of Washington and American Public Radio out of Minnesota, Minneapolis. So he's the APR side of it, but his program is distributed on the NPR satellite. So he helps public radio, no matter which network he's on. He's brought a lot of attention to public radio. 3.5 million people listen to that show every Saturday night.
And that show is actually done live?
That's
is that
live
correct?
from the World Theater, and as you hear it, that's the exact moment that it's being done. By the way, in ACUX, Howard Moore is one of his writers. I think you knew that. But he was a student here, an English student back in the 70s, early 70s.
What kind of, do you know anything about the history of that program as to how it developed and became a program on the radio?
He started about 10 years ago, Gary, and he just had a little local program there in Minneapolis, and he began to talk about his hometown, which is this mythical place, Lake Wobegon. And it kind of just spread from there. And finally, I think in 1980, he started going nationwide, and almost a cult following has developed for that show. It's the single most popular show on public radio.
Another thing about public radio, and we've alluded to it but not mentioned it directly, is that it really is free of commercials as such, which, how much of a difference do you think that makes in the listening audience? In other words, do you think there are some people who listen, you were talking about playing four songs in a row or something like that, and of course most people say, well, you play 4 songs in a row, then you get 4 commercials in a row, but of course that doesn't happen here.
Right. I think a large appeal is to people who are tired of, not necessarily tired of commercials, because we're all for commercials. That's what supports the industry. But they're tired of people yelling at them, and that's kind of what happens in a lot of local commercials, is people just yell at them, and it's jangling, it's nervous. When I turn back and listen to one of the other stations, it's just almost makes me kind of nervous, because the commercials are so noticeable after you've been used to non-commercial radio. But that doesn't mean that we're not for the local stations. We're very much appreciative of their help, and they have helped us, and our students work for them, and so forth. But it is different when you have a non-commercial
And they're each
station.
going for a certain audience, and
That's right.
they've designed everything in their programming to go for that audience.
That's right. KORQ has a large audience, Keene, KTLC, so we're not really competing with them. We think that we're attracting people who've kind of given up on radio, didn't think there was anything on for them. So we feel like we're pretty much building a new audience for radio.
I've heard a few comments lately that some people say that radio and television both are getting to the point where they may be close to an overkill as far as news is concerned, that for a while people were saying 30 minutes of news isn't enough, and so now all of a sudden it's gotten to be an hour of news and 2 hours of news. And do you think there's any danger of that?
Well, I think they overkill some stories. I get awfully tired of some stories, but I feel like it's a service that ought to be available, and if you want it, you can tune in. If not, you don't have to. You know, our news is designed for the 15-minute, quarter-hour segments. There are a lot of people who get in their car, go 15 minutes and stop, and so you can listen to about 15 minutes of our news and get the main headlines and one or two of the main features. So I kind of feel like it's a service that some people need in-depth news and other people just need to hear the headlines. So it's an alternative. If you notice locally, KORQ is the only station doing any local news, and they only do that in the morning. So if you really want news from the radio, you're up a creek, except for NPR. And so we feel like it's a service that's needed.
What about your programming hours when you come on the air and go off the air?
By the way, I forgot to mention, I don't want to forget KFQX, because they do AM radio, do a real outstanding job with news. And I missed your question.
About the decision for when to come on the air and when to go off the air as far as
that's real
programming is
interesting,
concerned.
Gary. The research, and this is very carefully researched, shows that the opinion leaders of the community tend to get up at about 5:30 in the morning, and they want radio by that early hour. If you don't come on by 5:30 in the morning, you're going to start losing listeners, potential all day long listeners. So we come struggling up here. Poor old Tim Graham comes up here at 5 o'clock every morning, and we're on the air by 5:30. And Grant Rampey, also, who's running camera out there, helps us get started in the morning, and it's necessary because so many people get up so early, and they want their radio from the time they get up.
And then your programming, of course, at ACU tries to involve students like Grant Rampey, for example.
Right. He's one of our outstanding seniors who helps us with both the radio and the television aspect of our department. That's one of our functions. But, you know, that's the thing that I think I've been most pleased with. Most people cannot tell which ones of us are the professional staff and which ones are the students. Our students are that good. And so I've just been, now sometimes you can hear something, they'll mispronounce a word or they'll make a mistake and you'll say, I bet that's a student. But most of our students have just done such an exceptional job that they sound as good as anybody in the market. So we're real pleased with that.
Some people may be interested in the idea that when school is out in between sessions and the students are home, what happens to
Well, I want you to remember this, Gary. When you're sitting at home enjoying your Christmas, we're going to be up here. Our little staff runs the station 365 days a year. So when the students are all gone, we'll be here. And we'll hire a few students who will be in Abilene over the break to help us stay on the air. We're on the air 135 hours a week, so it takes a lot of work.
We mentioned a while ago, and perhaps to be sure we don't mislead anyone, when we talked about not using commercials, you still are able to have sponsors and to sponsor programming. Isn't that correct?
About half of a public radio station's income comes from underwriting. And so we have businesses like Coca-Cola, like Chaparral Airlines, like Templeton's Pharmacy, who will, in exchange for mentioning their name, sponsor that program. It's not a full-blown commercial, but it does provide us with much-needed income, and it also gets the message out that here are some responsible businesses in the community that really believe in public radio and want to see the advantages of it. So it helps them as well as helping us. And our underwriters have been great. We have just been so pleased with the response we've had from them in this town.
6 months into it now, as you evaluate, let's say, programming, are you, do you feel pretty good that you made all the right decisions about programming, or do you anticipate some adjustments?
We'll be making some adjustments. We've just mailed out a survey to all of the people who supported us financially. By the way, I want to thank you for your support. You're one of our contributors. And so you'll be getting in the mail a survey, and it'll be asking you what hours you prefer, what programming, and what you'd like to hear more of, and so forth. And we'll make some adjustments after that. We have to be responsive to the community. We probably won't be able to go all classical, and we probably won't be able to go all jazz, but we will make some adjustments and try to meet what people in the community want. And then after a year or so, I think we'll have a good idea of what direction we need to go if we need to change.
From the standpoint of 6 months into it, on another perspective, 6 months into it from the standpoint of both staffing and 6 months into it from the standpoint of financially making it work, how do you evaluate those two areas?
It's a long-term project, Gary. I thought when we started the station it would probably take us 4 years to where we would be able to be self-sufficient. We would generate enough listener support and underwriting to pay the bill. And
is that fairly much an industry standard?
It takes 4 years. We are running the station as inexpensively as anybody can. We have one of the lowest annual budgets of any NPR station in the country. It costs just slightly over $100,000 a year for everything, the power, the programming, everything. So this year we hope to raise over $50,000, so we'd be about half the way there. We're hoping that maybe before the 4th year we could be self-sufficient, and if the listeners keep being as generous as they have, we'll be able to do that.
In the area of support, I know you have had not only financial support, but you've had some people make some very nice contributions in the way of their music collection.
Yes, we have. John Prestwood has donated his entire classical music library to us, about $4,500 collection.
I guess that's a significant thing for a beginning station.
It is, and that's the basis of most of the programming beginning at 6:30 each evening. You know, we usually run network programming at 8, the Chicago Symphony or the Milwaukee Symphony. But from 6:30 to 8, that's the Prestwood collection that you're hearing. And so without him, we would not have the excellent collection we do have.
From the standpoint of people who might have heard that, are you open to people bringing you their records? And
very much so. We've had some faculty members at Hardin-Simmons and some faculty members at ACU say, hey, here's some music that I have, I'd like to donate it to the station. And it's been great. I mean, it's really helped us. And so every time anybody takes an interest in the station, whether coming up with an idea for a program or source of music or some interviews, you know, that's what a community-based public radio station is all about. So we appreciate that very much.
There are other things we could talk about, but we're out of time. And on radio, you have to stay on time as well as on television, don't you? Thank you for visiting with us today,
My pleasure.
Larry. And thank you for being with us on campus with Dr. Larry Bradshaw at the studios of KACU-FM.